My name is Alex, I'm 27, and if you'd questioned me 12 months ago, I would have claimed my relatives weren't ideal, but they were reliable at minimum. The sort of kin who could bicker during festivities or murmur minor judgments privately, yet when a genuine crisis struck, they'd appear. I trusted that, right up until the evening I was hurried into an operation and understood how mistaken I was. It began on a regular Tuesday. I'd felt unwell for some time, with vague abdominal discomfort that I dismissed as tension or perhaps poor fast food. I put in extended shifts, often skimped on rest, and assumed my system was simply signaling that I wasn't unbreakable. That evening, however, the agony struck like a freight train. It bent me in half in my compact apartment's cooking area, intense enough that I couldn't remain upright. I dialed for emergency services, more frightened than ever before, gripping my belly as I struggled to inhale. The final notion before the paramedics placed me in the vehicle was, at least my parents will arrive, at least I won't face it solo. The procedure was mandatory. The physicians described an issue involving a blockage and inner hemorrhage, terms that merged in the fog of painkillers. I was scared, but I clung to the belief that my kin would be there upon my awakening. My folks, my sibling, perhaps a relative or two, they'd abandon all else. After all, who wouldn't? When your child, your brother or sister, your flesh and blood is rushed into an operation, you show up. But they didn't. When I regained consciousness hours later in the post-op area, disoriented and parched, the initial item I grabbed was my device. 0 unanswered calls prior to the operation. 0 messages inquiring about my condition. My torso constricted, not due to the sutures, but from this profound descending awareness. I browsed once more, partly sure the medications impaired my vision.
Nada. Merliquier.
It wasn't until the following day that the barrage commenced. My device vibrated incessantly. 89 overlooked calls, primarily from my mother, and a lengthy message that merely stated, "We must discuss." Immediately. Immediately. As though she'd been fretting anxiously overnight, deeply concerned. But where was she while I was on that surgical slab? Where was anybody? I assembled the puzzle gradually via online platforms. As I underwent sedation, my whole clan, parents, sibling, aunts, uncles, even grandparents, attended my cousin Derek's birthday celebration. Images showed them chuckling near a dessert, beverages clutched, decorations abound. My father had his limb around Derek in one shot, elevating a cup as if he were the most elated individual present. My mother had even remarked on one image, "Kinship foremost. Eternally. Kinship foremost." The phrase struck me like freezing liquid. I recall reclining there in the medical facility cot, sutures straining with each shift, gazing at those images. My monitor emitted a gentle tone nearby. I wasn't weeping. Not precisely. It was something graver. A sort of detachment that lodged in my torso, resembling a portal ceiling. They hadn't inquired until the festivity concluded, and even then, their communications weren't filled with worry. It was remorse, thinly veiled as haste. The caregiver entered near midday with a slight grin, questioning if visitors were arriving. I parted my lips, but no sounds emerged. My kin hadn't appeared.
Not a single one.
She offered me this compassionate glance, as if she grasped more than I voiced, and advised me not to fret, that certain individuals simply couldn't manage crises. But I understood differently. They hadn't arrived because they opted against it. They had determined Derek's birthday outweighed me being sliced open on a platform. That was the initial instance I permitted myself to revisit all the minor incidents I'd ignored for years. The occasion my parents deserted me after the formal dance since my sibling preferred a gathering.
The Manemai.
Successes, completing education, securing my initial position, were perpetually eclipsed by Derek's infinite triumphs. How my mother once declared outright, "You'll never glow like he does, but that's fine. You don't have to." I'd internalized that, convincing myself I was overanalyzing, that I merely needed to harden. But now, resting in that medical cot, I couldn't disregard the reality any longer. I wasn't a focus for them. I never was. And yet, that influx of overlooked calls and communications persisted. By the period I was sturdy enough to elevate myself, my device overflowed with frantic small appeals. "Contact us, Alex. This isn't how kinship functions. Don't exaggerate. We adore you." The boldness of it caused my palms to tremble. They hadn't appeared when it counted. They hadn't even dispatched blooms. But now they desired a conversation promptly, as if I was indebted to them. That was the instant the fury began to flourish, warm and consistent, beneath the detachment. I didn't recognize it then, but that fury would sustain me through the ensuing weeks. It would refine into something chillier, more intentional. Because if they believed they could forsake me in my weakest instant and then conceal it with some agitated notes, they were gravely incorrect. And the ironic part? They had zero clue what approached. I didn't reply to their communications for the initial few days. I reclined in that barren medical chamber, consuming flavorless broth and gelatin, browsing their online updates. While I remained with incisions across my midsection, laboring to ambulate to the restroom without grimacing, my parents uploaded images of the greatest kin evening ever, featuring Derek and his companions. My sibling even composed a description under one snapshot. We always appear for one another. That's what kinship signifies. I almost let my device slip when I perused it. Appear for one another? I was in the medical cot, sewn like a damaged plaything, and evidently I didn't qualify. The facility released me a week afterward. Nobody arrived to collect me. The caregiver rolled me to the entry, where I clumsily entered a rideshare, holding my sack against the pull of incisions. As we departed the facility, I pondered if perhaps I'd enter my dwelling and discover blossoms on the surface or meals in the cooler. But there was zilch. No message. No action. Just the identical quiet that had trailed me all week. 2 days post-return, Mother finally appeared without notice. I heard the latch turn. She retained a duplicate from my relocation years prior. The entrance opened and there she stood, grasping a sack of produce, as if that nullified all. She examined me thoroughly, her gaze shifting to the mending mark beneath my garment. "Alex," she uttered, with this exhale that seemed more bothered than worried. "You should have informed us of the severity. We assumed it was trivial. Do you realize how remorseful we all are?" "¿Y qué hice here?" I was hastened into urgent operation. How much graver could it be? She gestured dismissively as if I was amplifying. "Dear, we had already vowed to Derek we'd attend his birthday. You know its significance to him. We didn't wish him to feel forsaken on his special occasion." That term, forsaken, made my mandible clench. "So you forsook me in its place?" She scowled, placing the produce on the surface, as if to alter the topic. "You're being severe. We've always strived for you. But Derek, he requires us. You know how vulnerable he is. You're resilient. You can manage independently."
Résilie.
That term had always served as their justification. When my sibling needed education aid, they hurried to provide, labeling her sensitive. When Derek wrecked his vehicle last year, they united for him, stating he was enduring hardship. But me? I was always resilient, which truly meant we don't need to exert. I didn't utter much thereafter. I just affirmed, allowed her to prattle about kinship cohesion's importance, and then observed her depart as if nothing occurred. A few days later, the contacts resumed.
This time from my father.
His manner was less regretful, more authoritative. "Alex, you must cease turning this into a major issue. Everyone is distressed you're disregarding them. Derek particularly. He believes you're harboring resentment over naught. He mentioned he attempted to contact you the evening of the operation, but you didn't respond."
He clutched the device firmly.
"I was under sedation, Father." He laughed as if I'd jested. "Nonetheless, you could have messaged prior to entering. Just to notify everyone it was critical. Otherwise, how could we know?" That was the instant I comprehended this wasn't remorse. It was mitigation. They weren't apologetic for missing my operation. They were apologetic I wasn't complying with the narrative they desired. The subsequent kinship assembly reinforced that. They demanded I attend, claiming it would mend the divide. Against my wiser instincts, I went. I wished to check if perhaps, just perhaps, they'd recognize what transpired. But the moment I entered, Derek was prominent, boasting about how all united for his birthday. "Greatest evening of my existence," he declared, slapping my father on the arm. "Kin always supports me." I remained there, silent, while my mother handed me a dish like I was a visitor rather than her offspring. Nobody inquired about my healing. Nobody referenced the facility. Instead, my aunt inclined and murmured, "Don't pout, Alex. It was merely unfortunate scheduling." Derek's celebration was arranged months ahead. I ingested every acrid phrase I wished to voice and sat there, affirming courteously, as if I hadn't nearly perished solo while they consumed pastry. But internally, something was altering. The fury that had initiated in that medical cot was solidifying into something different. A resolve. A frigid lucidity. Because if they couldn't perceive what they'd committed, if they truly thought I'd simply erase it, then they had zero notion who I truly was. And eventually, they would discover. 2 weeks post that kinship assembly, I thought perhaps, just perhaps, I could commence establishing some separation between myself and the entire ordeal. My incisions were mending, I could ambulate without grimacing excessively, and I was back at employment partially. I reckoned if I maintained focus and concentrated on myself, the turmoil would fade. But then arrived the disloyalty that clarified everything. There was no progressing. Not with them. It commenced on a Wednesday night. I had just returned from employment, still uniformed, when my device alerted with a notice. It wasn't a contact or note, it was a financial warning. Abnormal transactions noted. My gut sank. I accessed the application, and indeed, over $4,000 had been extracted in one day. Airfare, lodging bookings, upscale eatery fees. All reserved under Derek's identity. Initially, I thought it must be deceit. I mean, no sane person would utilize my card without inquiring, correct? But then I recalled, my mother retained my extra card. The one I'd provided years ago upon relocating, for urgencies. I'd never reclaimed it because I assumed she'd never employ it without notifying. My torso tightened as the truth embedded. They had accessed my funds without consent, while I was still recuperating. I contacted Mother instantly. She responded on the second tone, her voice relaxed, as if all was fine. Oh, excellent, you're finally responding. I was beginning to think you'd severed ties entirely. Why is Derek using my card? I queried, voice even. There was a hesitation, then a belittling chuckle. Oh, Alex, don't create such commotion. Derek had a chance to journey with pals, and his funds were negative. We thought you'd not object to assisting for kinship. You've always been so self-reliant. My hold on the device intensified. Assisting? $4,000 isn't assisting. You pilfered from me. She inhaled sharply, as if I'd offended her. Don't phrase it that way. We planned to inform you soon. You earned sufficiently to share, and Derek truly required this. It's his final opportunity for such a journey before stabilizing. You wouldn't comprehend. My throat parched. I was in the facility a week prior solo, and you deemed it acceptable to deplete my funds so Derek could revel. Her voice stiffened, that piercing manner I recalled from youth when she wanted me ashamed. Alex, don't distort this. You should be thankful we rely on you to contribute when kinship demands. Derek has always supported us. It's time you learned likewise. I disconnected before uttering something regrettable, my pulse racing so intensely it ached. But the disloyalty didn't halt there. That weekend, I received another alert. My father had shifted funds from the shared crisis account we'd established years ago, in case something befell them. He and my mother had vowed never to access it without consulting me. Yet, half was vanished. When I challenged him, he dismissed it with the identical phrase. Kinship foremost. You're sturdy enough to reconstruct. It wasn't merely the funds. It was the concept. They had forsaken me to confront Operation Solo, then pivoted and treated me like a mobile treasury. As if my endurance held no worth except what I could supply to Derek's ease. The ultimate trigger occurred at Sunday meal. I hadn't intended to attend, but my sibling messaged that, it's time you cease brooding. Against my wiser judgment, I went, convincing myself I'd obtain explanations directly. The table was noisy with discussion when I entered. Derek sat at the forefront, beaming as he browsed images from his journey, images my funds had financed. He flourished his device, displaying lavish dinners, a vessel, amused companions. Man, this was the finest week of my existence. Couldn't have achieved it without kinship. He gazed directly at me when he stated it. Everyone applauded and celebrated like he'd accomplished something remarkable. My mother even appended, "See, Alex, this is what kinship sacrifice entails. We all aid one another."
Igaz d'addem, my ustensile immobile in my grasp.
Not one mention of my operation. Not one mention of the fact that they had pilfered from me. Just a claim for Derek, who had converted my funds into his triumph circuit. That was the instant something within me fractured. It wasn't just fury anymore. It was insight. They weren't going to alter. They had selected their favored child, and I was nothing but a handy secondary, someone to exploit when convenient. I grinned stiffly through the meal, affirming their vacant words, but internally, I vowed to myself. If they thought I'd continue this role, the resilient one, the expendable one, they were mistaken. And that was the evening I commenced subtly scheming. After that meal, I departed my parents' residence with an empty sensation in my chest. I recall the echo of their merriment trailing me as I shut the entrance, a noise that once felt reassuring, but now resembled blades against my sides. It was the noise of a clan bonded, but not including me. Opposing me. The rideshare back to my dwelling was hushed except for the faint drone of the motor. I no longer needed to prepare for their deceptions, their bias, or the perpetual contrasts to Derek. I wasn't the resilient one anymore. I was merely myself, and that was adequate. Then, a prospect emerged that altered everything. A coworker presented me to someone launching a fresh enterprise endeavor, and they required someone methodical, tenacious, and attentive to oversee activities. I wavered initially. I was still escaping debt, but something internal urged me to jump. I did. It was demanding labor, the type that exhausted me but satisfied. For the first time, my exertions weren't being diminished by another's demands or overlooked as anticipated. I was acknowledged, appreciated. Within 6 months, the endeavor was profitable, and I held shares in something with genuine promise. My name was on the documents, my inputs were recognized, and the economic steadiness I'd forfeited was returning swifter than I'd hoped. Meanwhile, my kin still believed I was scarcely managing. The few encounters with them, they made sarcastic remarks about my overwork or modest living. Derek, particularly, would sneer and say things like, "Not all are suited for the grand existence, cousin?" I grinned, affirmed, and allowed him to trust it, because the less they knew, the more authority I possessed. By the close of that year, I was more robust, economically, sentimentally, and intellectually than ever. I had sculpted a life sans them, one element at a time, and with each advance, I felt the burden of their disloyalty easing. But here's the matter. Just because I was advancing didn't mean I'd erased. No, the fury that had ignited in me that evening at meal had never extinguished. It had merely morphed from crude ache into something keener, more stable. Endurance. And when the instant came, and I knew it would, I'd be prepared. It was nearly uncanny how organically the elements began aligning, like destiny was guiding me towards something I hadn't ventured to imagine before. By the time a year had elapsed since my operation, my existence resembled nothing like the vacant, frantic months post my release. I was prospering, still humble by most measures. But for me, it felt like ascending from a chasm and standing on firm terrain for the first time. And that's when the data, the advantage I hadn't even sought, began to unveil itself. It started with Derek, naturally. He'd always been the vocal one, the exhibitor, boasting about agreements he pursued, currency he lacked, ladies he thought idolized him. At a shared acquaintances assembly, someone from secondary education I hadn't encountered in ages, Derek's name arose. Evidently, he had been touting a new investment scheme, vowing extraordinary gains if individuals invested. My acquaintance scoffed and whispered, "It's essentially a multilevel fraud. Half the folks who funded him are already probing." I didn't respond, just heeded, affirming nonchalantly. But internally, my thoughts raced. If Derek was defrauding people, it wasn't just conceit anymore. It was perilous. And if it collapsed, which it would, my kin's unquestioning backing for him would become their largest vulnerability. The second element of advantage came from my father. I was sifting through ancient files one night, arranging my papers now that I was better managing my finances, when I encountered documents from the crisis fund he had plundered. Hidden in the details was a point I hadn't spotted before. My name wasn't merely on the fund. I had complete legal entitlements to examine, extract, and inspect it. And as I reviewed the records, I saw trends. Currency shifted, extracted in peculiar sums, sometimes placed into what appeared as my parents' private projects. That night, I realized something vital. They weren't just negligent with my faith. They were negligent with their own records. If I desired, I could chart exactly where every cent had gone, and more crucially when. The ultimate element came, strangely, from my mother. She contacted one afternoon, the type of contact I nearly disregarded habitually. But interest prevailed, and I answered. Her manner was overly sweet, but underneath, I detected the tension. "Alex, love, you should attend the assembly this year. All will be present. Derek especially. He wants to display his achievements with the entire kin. You wouldn't skip it, would you?" I inquired why she pressed so intensely, and that's when she aired. "It's vital people view us bonded. There are gossips. Some don't grasp Derek's enterprise, and we don't want anyone devaluing our kin." There it was. Dread. Not of me, not of their actions, but of facades. Of standing. 4 years, I had been the disposable one, the fall guy. But now, unwittingly, they were delivering me the supreme edge I could request. Their urgency to maintain the illusion of flawlessness. I ended that contact with a serenity I hadn't experienced in months. My frame no longer throbbed from operation. My finances were steady. My role in the new enterprise endeavor was strengthening daily. And now, I had 3 irrefutable facts. Derek's deceit. My father's careless economic path. And my mother's fixation on impressions. The more I pondered, the clearer it grew. They had constructed their lives on a base of partiality, control, and falsehoods. And all it would require was the proper nudge at the proper instant to crumble the entire structure. And I, silent, disregarded, undervalued me, was positioned ideally to deliver that nudge. Currency shifted, extracted in peculiar sums, sometimes placed into what appeared as my parents' private projects. That night, I realized something vital. They weren't just negligent with my faith. They were negligent with their own records. If I desired, I could chart exactly where every cent had gone, and more crucially when. The ultimate element came, strangely, from my mother. She contacted one afternoon, the type of contact I nearly disregarded habitually. But interest prevailed, and I answered. Her manner was overly sweet, but underneath, I detected the tension. "Alex, love, you should attend the assembly this year. All will be present. Derek especially. He wants to display his achievements with the entire kin. You wouldn't skip it, would you?" I inquired why she pressed so intensely, and that's when she aired. "It's vital people view us bonded. There are gossips. Some don't grasp Derek's enterprise, and we don't want anyone devaluing our kin." There it was. Dread. Not of me, not of their actions, but of facades. Of standing. 4 years, I had been the disposable one, the fall guy. But now, unwittingly, they were delivering me the supreme edge I could request. Their urgency to maintain the illusion of flawlessness. I ended that contact with a serenity I hadn't experienced in months. My frame no longer throbbed from operation. My finances were steady. My role in the new enterprise endeavor was strengthening daily. And now, I had 3 irrefutable facts. Derek's deceit. My father's careless economic path. And my mother's fixation on impressions. The more I pondered, the clearer it grew. They had constructed their lives on a base of partiality, control, and falsehoods. And all it would require was the proper nudge at the proper instant to crumble the entire structure. And I, silent, disregarded, undervalued me, was positioned ideally to deliver that nudge. The evening of the kin assembly, I arrived delayed than customary. Not delayed enough to appear rude, but delayed enough to guarantee every gaze in the space turned when I entered the portals. The occasion was hosted at a leased venue hall. Glossy surfaces mirroring amber lights. A modest platform at the front where addresses were already progressing. My mother had demanded this year's assembly be exceptional. I knew why. She aimed to suppress the murmurs, the uncertainties spreading through the expanded kin about Derek's endeavors. The instant I entered, I spotted him. Derek stood amid the group, a vessel in one palm and his other limb around my father's arm. His attire seemed overly lavish for someone who had always subsisted on the generosity, or folly, of others. He was beaming broadly, enamel shining under the illumination, as he touted his growing operation. And with kin eternally supporting me, he declared, elevating his vessel. Achievement is unavoidable. The group cheered. My parents radiated with elation. My sibling rolled her eyes, but even she grinned as if proud to be linked to him. I stood at the rear momentarily, allowing the scenes to embed in my chest. The identical individuals who had left me to recline solo in a medical cot were now cheering the man who had taken from me and others, convinced he was the prized asset of the kin. I didn't hasten. Vengeance, after all, is most delightful when relished. I waited until post-meal, when the space hummed with discussion, before nearing my mother. She appeared surprised to see me, then swiftly concealed it with a grin. "Alex dear, so pleased you arrived. See, we're all united again. Isn't this splendid?" "Splendid," I echoed softly, my gaze drifting to Derek. "Mind if I speak briefly?" Her face tensed. "Oh, perhaps afterward, love." Derek readied something, but I was already ascending toward the platform. Discussions hushed as I mounted the stairs. Derek's arrogant grin wavered initially, doubt flashing in his gaze. I grasped the amplifier, allowing the quiet extend just sufficiently to make people fidget in their chairs. "I won't consume much of your period," I started, voice firm. "I just wish to express gratitude to everyone for attending tonight. Kin assemblies are crucial. They remind us who we can rely on when existence delivers unforeseen twists." A few courteous affirmations. My mother gripped her palms firmly. "Some of you might know," I proceeded, "that not long ago, I underwent urgent operation. It was life-endangering. And while I reclined in a medical cot, recuperating, this kin—" I hesitated, surveying the space. "Opted to commemorate Derek's birthday instead. Not one of them visited me." A wave traversed the group. I saw my aunt rigidify, my grandmother scowl. My mother's grin solidified. "But that's not the essence," I stated swiftly, elevating a palm before interruption. "The essence is that occasionally, the ones you anticipate to support you don't. And occasionally, the ones you least anticipate are the ones who perceive the truth. Like the individuals Derek has been conducting business with." The space shifted restlessly. Derek's eyes constricted. "Alex, don't," he whispered lowly, but the amplifier captured it. I grinned. Composed. Enduring. "See, I've been maintaining logs." And while my kin was occupied cheering Derek's alleged triumph, I uncovered where some of that currency truly originated. Financial shifts. Extractions from funds that weren't his. Even my own card, employed without approval. And then there are the backers. People in this very group, who entrusted Derek with their faith and reserves, only to encounter deceptions. Inhales. Mutterings. My father advanced, his face flushed. "That's sufficient, Alex. This is not the venue." "Conversely," I stated, my voice keen but composed. "This is precisely the venue. Because this kin prides itself on facades. On feigning we're bonded. But bonding built on deceit and bias isn't kinship. It's a scam." The space exploded in whispers. Derek's facade shattered. His grin vanished, replaced by a grimace. "You think you can destroy me with your tiny tales?" I extracted the dossier I'd carried, thick with printed records, captures, and papers.